My 8-year-old daughter was crying in the bathroom, banging on the pipes with her tiny fists, screaming that she just wanted to brush her teeth before school. My wife was standing in the kitchen with an empty pot in her hands, staring at the faucet like it had personally betrayed her. My son was crossing his legs in the hallway, begging me to figure out why nothing worked. And through the frosted window of our front door, I could see her, Karen, the HOA president, sitting in her white SUV across the street, watching our house with that smug, self-satisfied smile that I would come to understand was the expression of someone who had weaponized the smallest amount of power against innocent people. She had cut off our water in the dead of winter, not because we had done anything wrong, not because there was a legitimate issue, but because I had dared to tell her no. Because I had the audacity to point to the actual written rules instead of bowing to her interpretation. And now my family was suffering while she sat there, sipping her morning coffee, enjoying every second of our misery like it was a show created just for her entertainment. What I did not know yet, standing there watching my daughter sob over a toothbrush she could not use, was that this woman had made a catastrophic mistake. She had messed with the wrong family. And over the next several days, her entire kingdom of petty tyranny would come crumbling down around her in ways she never could have imagined. This is the story of how one HOA president destroyed herself by trying to destroy us. Let me tell you what you are going to learn from what happened to my family. You are going to learn how a person with minimal authority can become a genuine threat to your well-being and your safety. You are going to learn the warning signs that someone in a position of community leadership has crossed the line from annoying to dangerous. You are going to learn exactly what steps to take when an HOA president or board member abuses their power in ways that affect your basic living conditions. And you are going to learn that there is always a way to fight back, always a path to justice, even when it feels like the person making your life miserable has all the control. Because Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought her position made her immune to consequences. She thought that years of bullying her neighbors and controlling every aspect of this community meant that no one would ever stand up to her. She was wrong. And by the time this story ends, you will understand exactly how wrong she was. My name is Daniel, and I am 43 years old. I work as a project manager for a construction company, which means I spend most of my days dealing with schedules and contractors and making sure buildings get finished on time and under budget. My wife Sarah is a nurse at the local hospital. She works 3 12-hour shifts a week, mostly nights, and she comes home exhausted but fulfilled because she genuinely loves helping people. We have 2 kids. Emma is 8, all curly hair and big questions about the world. Tommy is 6, obsessed with dinosaurs and superheroes and anything that moves fast. We moved into Maple Ridge Estates 4 years ago because the neighborhood seemed perfect. The houses were well maintained. The streets were clean. The schools were excellent. There was a community pool and a playground and walking trails through the small patch of woods at the back of the development. It felt like exactly the kind of place where we could raise our children, build a life, and become part of a community that cared about its residents. What we did not know when we signed the papers and moved our furniture into that 3-bedroom colonial with the blue shutters was that Maple Ridge Estates was not a community. It was a dictatorship. And the dictator was a woman named Karen Mitchell, who had been HOA president for 7 years, and who ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of false politeness. I first encountered Karen 3 days after we moved in. I was in the front yard, trying to assemble a swing set for the kids, when a white SUV pulled up to the curb, and a woman climbed out. She was in her mid-50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a face that looked like it had never smiled genuinely at anything in its entire life. She was carrying a clipboard, which I would come to learn was her constant companion, her weapon of choice in the battle against any resident who dared to step out of line. She introduced herself as the HOA president and welcomed us to the neighborhood in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a greeting. Then she looked at the swing set pieces scattered across my lawn and told me that I would need to submit an exterior modification request before installing any play equipment, and that the approval process typically took 4 to 6 weeks, and that in the meantime, I should store all of these materials in my garage, where they would not be visible from the street. I thought she was joking. She was not joking. She handed me a stack of papers that was at least an inch thick and told me that these were the community guidelines and that I should familiarize myself with them immediately and that ignorance of the rules would not be accepted as an excuse for violations. Then she looked at the basketball hoop I had set up in the driveway the day before and informed me that it would need to be removed by end of day because it was not on the approved list of acceptable driveway items. I stood there holding that stack of papers, watching her climb back into her SUV, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I told myself that she was just being thorough, that she took pride in the neighborhood and wanted to maintain standards, that once we proved we were good neighbors, she would relax and leave us alone. I was so incredibly naive. Over the next 4 years, Karen made our lives a constant exercise in frustration. She measured our grass with a ruler and sent violation notices if it was a quarter-inch over the allowed height. She photographed our garbage cans if they were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. She sent letters about the color of our curtains, the placement of our garden hose, the type of mulch we used in our flower beds. She once fined us $50 because my son left his bicycle in the driveway overnight instead of putting it in the garage. But here is the thing that made Karen truly dangerous. It was not just that she was strict about the rules. It was that she was selective about who she enforced them against. Her friends and allies could do whatever they wanted. They could have boats parked in their driveways for weeks. They could let their lawns grow wild. They could paint their front doors any color they chose. But certain families, the ones who had questioned her decisions at meetings, the ones who had voted against her proposals, the ones who simply did not show her enough deference, those families were targeted relentlessly. We were on that list from the beginning. I think Karen sensed that I was not going to be one of her followers. I asked too many questions at meetings. I pointed out inconsistencies in her enforcement. I voted against a proposal that would have given her even more control over architectural decisions. And while I never confronted her directly, never raised my voice, never did anything that could be considered aggressive or inappropriate, I also never backed down. I knew my rights as a homeowner. I read the bylaws carefully. And when she tried to push boundaries, I pushed back. She hated that. But what happened in January was different. What happened in January was not about enforcing rules or maintaining standards or protecting property values. What happened in January was pure, calculated cruelty designed to punish my family for the unforgivable crime of not worshipping at the altar of Karen's authority. We love Christmas in our house. My wife grew up in a family that went all out for the holidays, and she has carried that tradition into our own home. We are not the kind of people who cover every inch of our property in blinking lights and inflatable snowmen. That is not our style. But we do enjoy creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere during the season. We hang a wreath on the door. We put up a string of white lights along the roofline. We place a few small decorations in the front garden. And we set up this glowing reindeer that my daughter absolutely adores. Emma named the reindeer Sparkle when she was 5 years old, and every year she asks when we are going to bring Sparkle out of the garage and plug him in. Setting up that reindeer has become one of her favorite holiday traditions. She helps me position him just right in the front yard, and then she stands back and claps her hands when I plug in the extension cord and he lights up. It is such a small thing, such a simple pleasure, but it means the world to her. And watching her face light up along with that reindeer is one of my favorite moments of the entire year. The HOA rules clearly stated that holiday decorations could remain up until January 5th. I had read that rule multiple times. I had highlighted it in my copy of the community guidelines. January 5th was the deadline, and we always made sure to take everything down by that date. This year, the 5th fell on a Sunday. We had plans that day. My parents were coming over for a late holiday dinner, and I knew we would be busy with preparations and visiting and all the chaos that comes with having family in the house. So I decided we would take down the decorations on January 6th, one day after the official deadline. I figured that since we had never had a problem before, since we had always been compliant, since we were literally talking about a single day, it would not be an issue. I should have known better. January 4th was a Saturday, and I was in the garage organizing some tools when I heard a car pull into our driveway. I walked outside and there she was. Karen, white SUV, clipboard in hand. That tight smile on her face that I had learned to recognize as the expression she wore when she was about to make someone's day significantly worse. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my holidays had been. She did not engage in any of the normal pleasantries that human beings exchange when they encounter each other. She pointed at our decorations and said that these should be down already. She said that the 5th was not a deadline, it was a guideline. She said that responsible homeowners understood that guideline meant having everything cleared before the stated date, not on the stated date. She said that she expected me to remove all holiday decorations before sunset today, and that failure to comply would result in immediate fines and further enforcement action. I took a breath. I reminded myself that losing my temper would only give her ammunition. I responded calmly, politely, but firmly. I told her that I had read the rules carefully, and that the rules clearly stated that decorations must be removed by January 5th, which meant that the 5th was the deadline, not a day before. I told her that we would be taking down our decorations on the 6th, which I acknowledged was one day past the deadline, but that given our 4 years of perfect compliance, and the fact that we were dealing with a single day difference, I hoped she could find it in her heart to show a little flexibility. I watched her face change as I spoke. That tight smile cracked and fell away, replaced by something cold and hard and genuinely frightening. Her eyes went flat. Her jaw tightened. She looked at me like I had personally insulted not just her authority, but her entire existence. She did not argue with me. She did not threaten me. She did not even respond to anything I had said. She just stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her SUV without another word. She climbed in, closed the door, and sat there for a few seconds, looking at our house. Then she drove away. I told myself that I had won that exchange, that I had stood my ground, cited the rules, and she had backed down. I told myself that she would probably send a passive-aggressive email or maybe a minor violation notice, and that would be the end of it. I had no idea that at that very moment, sitting in her SUV, she was already planning something far more serious, something that would make my family suffer in ways I never could have anticipated. That night was normal. We had dinner. The kids took their baths. Sarah and I watched a movie after they went to bed. I slept peacefully, unaware that Karen had already set her plan in motion, that she had already made the phone calls and given the orders that would upend our lives for the next 5 days. I woke up the next morning to my daughter screaming from the bathroom. The sound cut through my sleep like a knife. I was out of bed and running down the hallway before I was even fully conscious, my heart pounding, expecting to find her hurt or sick or in some kind of danger. I threw open the bathroom door and found Emma standing at the sink, toothbrush in hand, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me and said that the water was not working. She said she had been turning the faucet and nothing was coming out. She asked me to fix it because she needed to brush her teeth and she did not want to be late for school. I stepped past her and turned the faucet myself. Nothing, not a drip, not a trickle, nothing at all. I tried the hot water, nothing. I flushed the toilet, it did not refill. I felt a cold dread settling into my chest as I moved to the bathtub and tried those faucets. Nothing. I ran to the kitchen. Nothing. The laundry room, nothing. Every single water source in our house was completely dead. Sarah was awake now, standing in the kitchen with an empty pot in her hands, staring at the faucet like she could not process what was happening. Tommy was crossing his legs in the hallway, saying that he really needed to go to the bathroom and asking why the toilet would not flush. I told everyone to stay calm. I told them that there must be a broken main somewhere, that the utility company would fix it soon, that these things happen. I was trying to be reassuring even as my mind was racing through the possibilities. A burst pipe, a main break in the neighborhood, some kind of scheduled maintenance that we had not been notified about. I grabbed my phone and called the water utility company. The automated system told me there were no reported outages in my area. I pressed buttons until I got a human being on the line, and she confirmed that according to their records, water service to my address was active and uninterrupted. That did not make sense. If the water service was active, why was nothing coming out of our faucets? The utility representative suggested that I check with my HOA, because in some communities, the association controls the connection points between the main lines and individual homes. I thanked her and hung up. I stood in my kitchen, looking at my wife and my scared children, and I felt the first stirrings of a terrible suspicion. But I pushed it down. That was too crazy, too extreme, too unbelievable. Even Karen would not go that far. Would she? I called the HOA maintenance line. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. It was a man named Dave who worked as the community's handyman and groundskeeper. I had spoken to him a few times before, and he had always seemed like a decent guy, just someone trying to do his job. I explained the situation. No water, nothing coming out of any faucet. Could he tell me if there was some kind of issue with the lines in our part of the neighborhood? There was a pause on the other end. It was a pause that I would later understand was the pause of a man who was deeply uncomfortable with what he had to say. Dave told me that there was no issue with the neighborhood lines. He told me that my water had been shut off at the community access point. He told me that Karen had said I requested a temporary shut-off for plumbing repairs and that she had authorized him to disable the connection yesterday afternoon. The phone nearly dropped from my hand. I had not requested any shut-off. I had not called anyone about plumbing repairs. I had not spoken to anyone at the HOA except Karen herself, and that conversation had been about Christmas decorations, not water. Karen had lied. She had fabricated a request that I never made. She had ordered my family's water supply disconnected in the middle of January, when temperatures were dropping below freezing every night, when my children needed baths and my wife needed to take medications that required water, when we depended on that basic utility for every aspect of our daily lives. I asked Dave to turn it back on immediately. I told him that I had never made any such request. I told him that this was a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding, and that we needed our water restored right now. Another pause, longer this time. Dave told me that he was sorry, but he could not turn the water back on without authorization from Karen. He told me that she had been very clear that the shut-off was to remain in place until she personally approved its restoration. He told me that he understood this was frustrating, but that his hands were tied, and that I would need to take it up with her directly. I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, not from cold, from rage. I threw on a coat and shoes and walked across the street to Karen's house. She lived in the largest home in the neighborhood, a sprawling colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. I had always suspected that her obsession with controlling the HOA had something to do with compensating for something else in her life. But in that moment, I did not care about her psychology. I cared about getting my water turned back on. I rang the doorbell and waited. I could see movement through the frosted glass of her front door. I knew she was home. I rang again. The door opened, and there she was, Karen. Dressed in casual clothes, hair perfect as always, that smug expression on her face that I was learning to hate more than I had ever hated anything in my life. I told her that I knew what she had done. I told her that she had lied to the maintenance worker and had my water shut off. I told her that this was illegal, that it was dangerous, that she was putting my family at risk, and that I demanded she have the water restored immediately. She smiled at me, not the tight smile she used during official business. A different smile, a satisfied smile, the smile of someone who was thoroughly enjoying themselves. She said that maybe if I had followed the HOA rules, things like this would not happen. She said that she had warned me about the decorations, and I had chosen to ignore her. She said that actions have consequences, and that I should consider this a learning experience about the importance of community compliance. I could not believe what I was hearing. She was admitting it. She was standing there, openly admitting that she had cut off my family's water supply as punishment for not taking down our Christmas decorations a day early. I told her that we had children in our house. I told her that my wife needed water for her medications, that she took pills that had to be swallowed with a full glass of water, and that she was a nurse who needed to be clean and presentable for her shifts at the hospital. I told her that this was not a minor inconvenience, that this was a crisis, and that what she was doing was not just cruel, but actually illegal. She shrugged, literally shrugged, like I had just told her that the weather was going to be cloudy tomorrow. She told me that was too bad. She told me that if I wanted to file a complaint, I was welcome to do so, but that I should know the board listened to her and that my complaint would go nowhere. She told me that she hoped I would think about this situation the next time I considered disrespecting the guidelines that made our community great. Then she stepped back and closed the door in my face. I stood on her porch for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. The rage was building inside me now, a hot pressure in my chest that made me want to kick down her door and scream at her until she understood what she was doing to my family. But I controlled myself. I took deep breaths. I reminded myself that getting arrested for assault was not going to help my kids get their water back. I walked back to my house and told Sarah what had happened. She stared at me with an expression of complete disbelief. She asked if I was serious. She asked if Karen had really admitted to shutting off our water because of Christmas decorations. She asked what kind of person would do something like that. I did not have answers. All I had was a problem that I did not know how to solve. I spent the next several hours on the phone. I called the HOA management company, the third-party firm that handled the administrative aspects of our association. They told me that all utility decisions were handled at the local level by the HOA president and board. They told me that they would document my complaint, but that they had no authority to override Karen's decision. They told me that I should try to resolve the issue directly with my local leadership. I called the police non-emergency line. An officer told me that this sounded like a civil matter between me and my HOA, and that unless I had evidence of a crime, there was not much they could do. I asked if cutting off someone's water supply under false pretenses was not a crime. He said it might be, depending on the circumstances, but that I would need to speak to a lawyer about that. I called 3 different attorneys. 2 were not available on a Saturday. One listened to my story and told me that I definitely had grounds for a lawsuit, but that legal action would take weeks or months, and that in the meantime, I would need to find another way to restore my utilities. I called plumbing companies. The first one told me they could not help because the shutoff was at a community access point that they had no authority to touch. The second one said the same thing. The third one told me that whoever had shut off the water had put a lock on the valve, and that breaking that lock would be considered tampering with HOA property, which could expose me to legal liability. I was trapped, completely trapped. Karen had found a way to hurt my family that was just ambiguous enough to avoid immediate criminal charges, just bureaucratic enough to tie up any legal response in red tape, and just cruel enough to make every hour feel like an eternity. That first night without water was brutal. We could not cook anything that required boiling. We could not wash dishes properly. We could not take showers. We could not flush the toilets. We could not even fill a glass from the tap to take with our dinner. I went out and bought as much bottled water as I could carry. Cases and cases of it, loaded into the back of my car, brought home and stacked in the kitchen. We used that water for everything: drinking, brushing teeth, washing hands, giving the kids sponge baths with warmed water that we heated in the microwave. The toilets were the worst part. Without the ability to flush, we had to pour water into the bowl manually to force a flush. It took about 1.5 gallons each time. We went through our bottled water supply at an alarming rate. Tommy was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he knew something was very wrong. He asked why we could not just turn on the faucet like we always did. He asked why we had to drink from bottles instead of cups. He asked if the house was broken and if we were going to have to move. Emma understood more than her brother. She had heard fragments of my conversation with Karen. She had seen the look on my face when I came back from across the street. She knew that this was not an accident, that someone had done this to us on purpose. That night, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked at me with those big eyes and asked why the lady from the HOA wanted to hurt our family. She asked if we had done something wrong. She asked if we were in trouble. I did not know what to say. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that there are people in this world who have so little genuine power that they become obsessed with whatever tiny authority they can scrape together? How do you explain that some people are so broken inside that they can only feel good about themselves by making others feel bad? How do you explain that we had done nothing wrong, absolutely nothing, and yet we were being punished because one bitter, twisted woman could not handle being told no? I hugged my daughter and told her that everything was going to be okay. I told her that we were working on fixing the problem. I told her that sometimes adults do things that do not make sense, but that we would get through this together. I was not sure. I believed my own words. The next day was Sunday, January 5th, the actual deadline for removing Christmas decorations. I woke up early, still exhausted from a night of poor sleep, and I went outside and took down every single decoration. The lights came off the roofline. The wreath came off the door. The small decorations came out of the garden. And yes, Sparkle the reindeer got unplugged and carried back to the garage. Emma watched from the window. She did not say anything, but I could see the sadness in her face as I carried her beloved reindeer away. This was not how the season was supposed to end. We were supposed to take down the decorations together as a family, with hot chocolate and laughter and promises about next year. Instead, I was rushing through the process alone, in the cold January air, because I was desperately hoping that if I complied with Karen's demands, she might relent and give us our water back. She did not. I walked across the street again after the decorations were down. I rang her doorbell and waited. This time she did not answer. I could see her car in the driveway. I knew she was home, but she refused to come to the door. I called the HOA maintenance line and spoke to Dave again. I told him that I had removed all the decorations. I asked if Karen had provided any instructions for restoring our water. He told me that he had not heard anything from her since Friday. He told me that he was sorry about all of this, that he did not agree with what was happening, but that he needed his job and could not afford to go against her. I understood his position. I did not blame him. I blamed Karen and only Karen. That day we tried to establish some kind of routine. We rationed our bottled water. We figured out the most efficient way to do basic hygiene with limited resources. We tried to keep the kids distracted with games and movies and anything else that would take their minds off the situation. But it was impossible to forget. Every time someone needed to use the bathroom, it was a reminder. Every time someone was thirsty, it was a reminder. Every time we tried to cook or clean or do any of the normal activities of daily life, we were confronted with the reality of our situation. And then there was Karen. Every afternoon, around 4 o'clock, her white SUV would cruise slowly down our street. She would drive past our house at walking speed, and through the tinted windows I could see her face. That satisfied smile. That expression of pure, uncut enjoyment. She was savoring this. She was relishing every moment of our suffering. This was not about the Christmas decorations. This was about power. This was about showing everyone in the neighborhood what happened when you crossed Karen Mitchell. This was about making an example out of us. I tried to document everything. I took photos. I recorded dates and times in a notebook. I saved every email and every text message. I knew that eventually this would end up in some kind of legal or administrative proceeding, and I wanted to have evidence of exactly what had been done to us. On the third day, Karen started talking to the neighbors. I found out from our next-door neighbor, a woman named Linda who had always been friendly to us. She came over to check on us, bringing a casserole and a sympathetic expression, and she told us what Karen had been saying. According to Karen, we had shut off our own water. She was telling everyone that we had done it ourselves as some kind of scam or ploy for attention. She was saying that we were unstable people who manufactured crises to make ourselves look like victims. She was saying that we were toxic residents who would never fit into the community and that the neighborhood would be better off without us. Linda did not believe any of it. She had lived next to us for 4 years. She had seen us at community events. She had watched our kids grow up. She knew we were good people. But she also told us that not everyone was so skeptical, that Karen had spent years cultivating her reputation and building her power base, and that some residents were inclined to believe whatever she said. The lies were almost worse than the lack of water. Karen was not just attacking our physical well-being. She was attacking our reputation, our standing in the community, our relationships with our neighbors. She was trying to isolate us, to turn everyone against us, to make us so unwelcome that we would have no choice but to leave. Day 4 was when things started to break down. My wife was exhausted. She had worked a 12-hour shift at the hospital and come home to a house where she could not take a proper shower, could not wash her scrubs properly, could not do any of the basic self-care that she needed after spending all night on her feet caring for sick patients. She stood in the bathroom, trying to clean herself with a washcloth and bottled water, and she started crying. I held her and told her we would get through this, but I was starting to have doubts. Every avenue I pursued ran into a dead end. The HOA board members I reached out to either did not respond or told me that Karen handled all utility matters and that I should take it up with her. The lawyers I consulted told me that pursuing a case would be expensive and time-consuming. The city and county agencies I called kept passing me from one department to another without anyone taking responsibility. That night, Tommy had an accident. He was only 6, and the stress of the situation had gotten to him, and he wet his bed. But we could not just throw his sheets in the washing machine and clean up like normal. We had to figure out how to deal with it using our dwindling supply of bottled water. My wife spent an hour hand-washing his sheets and pajamas in a bucket, tears streaming down her face the entire time. Day 5, the day everything finally changed. Sarah had reached her breaking point. She told me that she could not do this anymore, that she was going to call every agency she could think of until someone listened. She started with the city utilities department, explaining our situation to whoever would listen, demanding to speak to supervisors, refusing to be transferred or put on hold or brushed off. I do not know exactly who she talked to or what she said, but within 2 hours, a city inspector was on his way to our house. His name was Robert. He was a middle-aged man with a clipboard of his own, but unlike Karen's clipboard, his was attached to actual authority and actual consequences. He listened to our story with a concerned expression, taking notes, asking clarifying questions, treating us like human beings instead of problems to be dismissed. He told us that what we were describing was potentially a serious violation of multiple regulations. He told us that no HOA had the right to disconnect a resident's water supply as a form of punishment or coercion. He told us that if what we were saying was true, there would be significant consequences for whoever was responsible. Then he asked us to show him the water access point. We walked outside to the utility area at the side of our house, where the connection between the main line and our home's plumbing was located. It was housed in a small concrete box with a metal lid, the kind of thing that most homeowners never think about because it just works in the background of their lives. Robert opened the lid and examined the valve inside. After about 30 seconds, he looked up at me and told me what I already knew. The water had been manually disabled. There was a lock on the valve, and that lock was engraved with the HOA's logo. This was not a malfunction. This was not a break in the line. This was deliberate, and it had been done by someone with access to HOA equipment. That was when Karen appeared. She must have been watching from her window. She must have seen the city vehicle pull up to our house. She came rushing across the street, moving faster than I had ever seen her move, her face arranged into an expression of concerned helpfulness that I knew was completely false. She introduced herself to Robert as the HOA president. She told him that she was sorry he had been called out for nothing. She told him that this family was making false accusations, that they had a history of causing problems in the neighborhood, that they had been harassing her for months over imaginary grievances. Robert listened politely, then asked her to explain the lock on the valve. Karen's expression flickered. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty behind the confident facade. Then she recovered and launched into an explanation. She said that there had been a neighborhood leak detected in the main lines. She said that she had ordered several homes shut off temporarily while the issue was investigated. She said that this was standard procedure and that everything had been done properly. Robert pulled out his tablet and checked something. Then he looked at Karen and told her that according to city records, no leak had been reported in this area. He told her that no other homes in the neighborhood had been flagged as having interrupted service. He told her that as far as he could determine, only this one address had been affected. Karen started to respond, but Robert cut her off. He asked her directly whether she had authorized the shut-off of water to this specific home as a form of enforcement action. She hesitated too long. Her eyes darted between me and Robert and the open valve box. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out what lie she could tell that would be believed. But she had already told too many lies to too many people. Dave, the maintenance worker, knew the truth. Linda knew bits and pieces. Other neighbors had heard different versions of the story, and now Robert was standing there with records that contradicted everything she was saying. She tried another angle. She said that the homeowner had been in violation of community guidelines. She said that the HOA had the right to take enforcement action against non-compliant residents. She said that water service was tied to community standing and that certain privileges could be revoked for residents who refused to follow the rules. Robert stared at her for a long moment. Then he told her that no HOA in this state had the authority to disconnect utility services for any reason. He told her that water access was a basic right that could not be tied to compliance with decoration guidelines or any other non-essential regulation. He told her that what she was describing was not enforcement, it was harassment, and it was potentially criminal. Karen's face went red. The helpful, concerned expression disappeared entirely, replaced by raw anger. She looked at me with such hatred that I actually took a step backward. She told Robert that he did not understand how these communities worked. She told him that she had been managing this neighborhood for 7 years and that she knew exactly what she was allowed to do. She told him that if he interfered with her authority, she would make sure he regretted it. It was the wrong thing to say. Robert did not raise his voice. He did not get angry. He simply told Karen that she had just threatened a city official in the course of his duties. He told her that he was ordering the water restored immediately. He told her that he would be filing a report with multiple agencies. And he told her that if the water was not back on within 30 minutes, he would have the police here to assist with restoring service. Karen looked like she wanted to say something else, something cutting, something to reassert her dominance. But for once in her life, she seemed to realize that she had lost. She stood there for a few seconds, mouth opening and closing, and then she turned and walked back to her house without another word. 20 minutes later, Dave showed up with his tools. He looked embarrassed. He apologized to me multiple times as he removed the lock and restored the valve to its normal position. He told me that he had never wanted to be part of this, that he had just been following orders, that he hoped I could understand his position. I told him I did not blame him. I told him that Karen had put him in an impossible situation. I told him that if he was willing to tell the truth about what had happened, it would help ensure that she could never do this to anyone again. He said he would. When I went back inside, my daughter was standing at the kitchen sink, watching water flow from the faucet. She looked at me with an expression of pure joy, and she asked if I had fixed it. I told her that we had fixed it together, as a family. That night, we all took long, hot showers. We ran the washing machine with every piece of laundry we had accumulated. We flushed the toilets just because we could. We stood at the kitchen sink and let the water run over our hands, marveling at something we had always taken for granted. But the story was not over, not by a long shot. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for the following evening. Every resident in Maple Ridge Estates was invited to attend. The meeting room at the community center was standing room only, packed with people who had heard various versions of what had happened and wanted to know the truth. I was asked to speak. I stood up in front of my neighbors, many of whom I barely knew, and I told them everything. I told them about the decorations and the confrontation with Karen. I told them about waking up to no water. I told them about the 5 days of struggle. I told them about Karen's admissions, her lies to the neighbors, her attempts to discredit us. I told them about the city inspector and the locked valve and the threats she had made. When I finished, there was silence. Then, slowly, other people started standing up. Linda spoke first. She confirmed what she had heard Karen saying about us, the lies about shutting off our own water, the claims that we were unstable and toxic. She said she had never believed those lies, but that she had been afraid to speak up because she did not want to become Karen's next target. Then a man named Richard stood up. He told a story about how Karen had tried to fine him into bankruptcy over minor landscaping issues after he voted against her at an annual meeting 3 years ago. He said the fines had totaled over $8,000 and that he had to hire a lawyer to get them overturned. Then a woman named Maria. She said that Karen had threatened to have her car towed when she had overnight guests who parked on the street. She said Karen had told her that she knew where Maria worked and that she could make trouble for her there too. Then more people, and more. Stories came pouring out, stories that had been suppressed for years because everyone was afraid of Karen's retaliation. Stories of harassment and intimidation and abuse of power. Stories of families who had been driven out of the neighborhood. Stories of good people who had been made to feel like criminals for having the wrong color mailbox or the wrong type of lawn furniture. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that what had happened to my family was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 7 years of tyranny. Karen had been ruling this neighborhood through fear and manipulation, targeting anyone who challenged her authority, using her position to satisfy her own need for control and power. The board voted unanimously to suspend Karen's authority immediately. They voted to launch a formal investigation into all of her enforcement actions over the past several years. They voted to refer the water shutoff incident to both the city authorities and the county prosecutor's office for potential criminal charges. Karen was not at the meeting. She had refused to attend, but I am told that when she received notification of the board's decisions, she finally understood that her reign was over. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Karen's misconduct became clear. The investigation revealed that she had been creating false maintenance orders, authorizing fines without board approval, and using HOA funds for personal expenses. She had been keeping 2 sets of books, one for the board to see and one that reflected what was actually happening with the association's money. She had been threatening vendors and contractors to give her kickbacks. She had been operating less like a community leader and more like a petty crime boss. The city issued her a formal citation for the unlawful interruption of utility services. The county prosecutor's office opened an investigation into potential fraud and harassment charges. Several residents, including my family, filed civil lawsuits seeking damages for emotional distress, property devaluation, and illegal interference with basic living necessities. Karen tried to fight back at first. She sent letters to board members claiming that we were all conspiring against her. She posted on social media about how she was being victimized by ungrateful residents who did not appreciate everything she had done for the community. She threatened to sue anyone who spoke negatively about her. But the evidence was overwhelming. Too many people had come forward. Too many records had been uncovered. Too many lies had been exposed. 6 weeks after the water incident, Karen sold her house and moved away. I do not know where she went. I do not particularly care. What matters is that she is gone and that she can never hurt anyone in this neighborhood again. The new HOA board is completely different. It is made up of reasonable people who actually want to serve the community rather than control it. They revised the bylaws to prevent any single person from accumulating the kind of power that Karen had wielded. They implemented transparency measures so that residents could see exactly how decisions were being made and how funds were being spent. They changed the enforcement process so that minor violations would be handled with warnings and education rather than immediate fines and punishment. The atmosphere in Maple Ridge Estates has transformed. People actually talk to each other now. They wave when they drive by. They attend community events not out of obligation or fear, but because they genuinely want to be there. The neighborhood finally feels like what it was always supposed to be, a community of neighbors who look out for each other. My family has healed from the experience, though it took time. Emma still sometimes asks about those 5 days, trying to understand why someone would be so mean. I have tried to turn it into a lesson about standing up for what is right, about not letting bullies win, about the importance of community and neighbors supporting each other. I hope she carries those lessons with her as she grows up. Tommy is mostly past it. He is young enough that the experience has already started to fade into a distant memory of something confusing that happened when he was little. He is back to dinosaurs and superheroes and all the normal concerns of a 6-year-old boy. Sarah and I have grown closer through the ordeal. When you go through something like that together, when you face that kind of adversity as a team, it either breaks you or it strengthens you. We came out stronger. We trust each other more. We know that when things get difficult, we can count on each other to keep fighting. And as for me, I learned something important about myself during those 5 days. I learned that I am capable of staying calm under pressure, of pursuing every available option, of refusing to give up even when the situation seems hopeless. I learned that documenting everything is crucial when you are dealing with people who abuse their power. I learned that reaching out to the right authorities can make all the difference, even when local power structures seem rigged against you. I also learned that people like Karen are more common than any of us want to believe. They exist in HOAs, in workplaces, in community organizations, in any context where someone can accumulate a little bit of authority over others. They are drawn to those positions precisely because they crave the power, and they often do tremendous damage before anyone manages to stop them. If you are dealing with someone like Karen in your own life, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me at the beginning. Document everything. Save every email, every letter, every text message. Take photos when relevant. Keep a written log of every interaction with dates and times and witnesses if possible. Build your evidence file before you need it, because you will need it. Know your rights. Read the bylaws, the regulations, the laws that apply to your situation. When someone tells you they have the authority to do something, verify it. Often they are bluffing or stretching the truth or outright lying. Knowledge is power, and when you know exactly what the rules actually say, you cannot be intimidated by people who are counting on your ignorance. Find allies. Talk to other people who have dealt with the same person. Share information. Support each other. Bullies like Karen thrive when their targets are isolated. They wither when people start comparing notes and realizing that they are not alone. Escalate appropriately. Start with direct communication, but do not be afraid to go higher when that does not work. Contact management companies, board members, city officials, state agencies. Keep climbing the ladder until you find someone who will actually help. The right person with the right authority can cut through years of entrenched dysfunction in a single afternoon. And never, ever give up. People like Karen are counting on you to get tired, to get discouraged, to decide it is not worth the fight. They win when you give up. They lose when you persist. Keep fighting until justice is done. I think about that moment often, the moment when my daughter asked why that lady wanted to hurt us. It still breaks my heart a little every time. No child should have to wonder why an adult would deliberately cause their family to suffer. No child should have to experience what our kids experienced during those 5 days. But I also think about the moment when the water came back on. I think about Emma's face when she saw the faucet working again. I think about the hot showers we took that night. I think about standing in front of my neighbors and finally telling the truth after Karen had tried so hard to bury it. I think about watching her empire crumble as person after person came forward with their own stories. Justice is not guaranteed in this world. Sometimes the bullies win. Sometimes the powerful abuse their position and never face consequences. But sometimes, if you fight hard enough and refuse to give up, the truth comes out and the right thing happens. That is what happened in Maple Ridge Estates. That is what happened to my family. And if you are in a similar situation, fighting your own battle against your own Karen, I want you to know that it can happen for you too. Keep fighting, document everything, find your allies, know your rights, escalate when necessary, and never, ever let them see you give up. Because people who abuse their power for petty reasons are ultimately weak. They derive their strength from your silence, your compliance, your fear. When you refuse to be silent, when you refuse to comply with illegal demands, when you refuse to be afraid, their power evaporates like morning dew. Karen Mitchell thought she was untouchable. She thought her position made her a queen. She thought she could do whatever she wanted to anyone she wanted without consequences. She was wrong. And if there is a Karen in your life, I hope my story helps you prove that they are wrong too. This is Daniel, signing off from Maple Ridge Estates. If you have your own story about dealing with HOA abuse, about standing up to bullies in positions of petty power, about fighting for your rights when the system seemed rigged against you, I would love to hear it. Share your experience in the comments. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be pushed around. And if you found value in this story, if it helped you or inspired you, or just made you feel less alone in whatever you are dealing with, share it with someone else who might need to hear it. Pass it along. Help others understand that they do not have to accept being mistreated, that there are ways to fight back, that justice is possible even when it feels impossibly far away. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, no matter what challenges you are facing, you are not alone. We are all in this together. And together, we can stand up to any Karen, any bully, any petty tyrant who thinks they can push us around. Stay strong, keep fighting, and never, ever let them take away your water.